Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. I am so excited to welcome Ralph Rewers, my dear friend and longtime colleague, to this podcast. Ralph is a legend in medical affairs. So it's this conversation is going to be a real treat. It's a long time coming. We've been planning this for a long time. We're going to talk about the history and the evolution of medical affairs. Before I get into that, I just want to recognize that we do have a sponsor, Momentum Events. Guys, you still have time to sign up for AI in Medical Affairs, which is a conference coming up in Philly, January 28th and 29th. So go to AI in Medical Affairs. Just type that into Google, it'll come right up, or go to my LinkedIn page. You'll see it on there. You can register. If you use code MSL15, you get 15% off. So this is going to be your last chance because the conference is in a couple weeks. So check it out, and I hope to see you there. So Ralph, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. And thanks for the kind words, first of all. And I'm very honored to be on this. You said legend, but Tom, you're a legend too. And I mean that sincerely, not just from, what we're going to do here in the podcast, but also, your ability to place people in positions and let them flourish, Tom. You do an amazing, you and your team do an amazing job. And so I'm really honored to spend some time with you today.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, my friend. And this topic is one that I've been wanting to do for a while because obviously we talk about MSL stuff, we talk about medical affairs stuff, but we've never really done an episode dedicated to the history and the evolution. So why don't we start with what is the definition of medical affairs and how does it fit into the pharmaceutical industry?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tom. And so I look at medical affairs as being unique, unique in the aspect of there's R&D, certainly. All companies will always have a research and development where they discover new compounds, they take them through clinical trials, and they bring them to launch.
Mhm.
And then you get your commercial team on the other end of it, which is an organization that usually picks up the product about 6 months before launch, takes it through launch and through its life cycle. Medical affairs sits in the middle. And so we have our feet in both areas, both on the R&D side and helping with development, helping with trials, helping with recruitment. And then on the other side, we take the product through launch and through its life cycle, which also includes some additional studies that we'll do to look at new indications. So it sits in a very unique aspect in that it has that foothold in both areas. And it's kind of that bridge. I call medical affairs a bridge between the two and taking the product from probably phase one, phase two, all the way through
Mm,
till the end of life cycle.
awesome. And when did this happen? When was the origin of medical affairs in industry?
Yeah, I really think originally medical affairs was usually at most companies called scientific affairs, and they usually reported into research and development because the researchers needed someone to work with thought leaders to help to develop the compounds, to develop new ideas, new indications. So really, it started in, I would say, in the late 60s, 70s, but really the organization started to flourish in the 80s and 90s. And so I'm not quite that old. I wasn't actually in medical affairs in 67. Let's put that out there.
Well,
But that's really when it started to really begin.
yeah. And this next question is a very common trivia question in medical affairs. So I want everybody to pay attention because you might actually get this at a conference or some kind of training in the future. But when was the first ever MSL deployed, as far as you know?
So as far as I know, I don't know the name of the person, gotta be honest. And yes, I was alive, but still pretty much in grade school. But the first MSL was deployed by the Upjohn Company, and that was 1967. So as far as records go, that's what's quoted, and I tend to believe that quite a bit.
And that's what I've heard. I've heard the same thing. I think that that's kind of common now. Well, it's kind of the common, I guess, answer to that question. Coincidentally, I was born in 1967, so I'm as old as the first MSL. Go figure.
Yeah. The
Um,
other thing, Tom, real interesting
yeah.
as an addition is, I graduated from Purdue University in pharmacy school in 1980, and half of my class, because we were very close to Eli Lilly there in Indiana, half of my class actually were recruited to be sales representatives, and so I do know that Eli Lilly, Upjohn, and Merck at that time in the early 80s deployed all of their sales reps were pharmacists. So every one of
Mm.
them had a pharmacy background. So you can see how that's evolved over time too. So back then in the 80s, most of the sales reps had medical backgrounds. And now that's evolved to more of a commercial presence and people without medical backgrounds. And I do think that really kind of set the tone for building a medical affairs department and MSLs to complement because there were less pharmacists employed in the sales department. So I think that's another piece that actually kind of evolved over time.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of a telltale sign of how things, part of that evolution. When I was a rep a long time ago, there weren't, this is back in the 80s, 90s timeframe. There were not a lot of MSLs that I recall. We had no MSLs at my company, but we had a speakers bureau. So it was almost like a rent to MSL. Like you actually had to bring an expert in to do presentations and that sort of thing. So things have really exploded over the years. But let me ask you, what would you say, getting back to the origin of the MSL, what were the key factors or what were the needs that would have led to these companies putting out MSLs?
Yeah, so I believe, Tom, I really think, and I was there, I started in clinical practice in 1980. I spent 14 years in practice and actually would have a MSL-like person call on me in the hospital. And then subsequently, I started in 1994. But really, the key factors were while the representatives had the ability to engage the docs and build trust and build relationships. There were a lot of deep scientific questions and questions that were potentially outside the label that a representative couldn't really answer. And so when you started to talk about deep science, when you started to talk about even some very early pharmacoeconomic data, how do we balance the cost of a medication and how can we look at broader sense and things like showing the value of medicines and having those deep scientific conversations, that's where I think the MSLs and field medical could flourish. And then also, a lot of people had ideas. I know the drug is indicated here, but I think it also can be effective here in this other indication. And so, who would work with them? Who would be out in the field to kind of help them? And that certainly was some of the factors that led to an increase in medical affairs as well as field medical, the MSLs.
Got you. Yeah. We've seen such a we've seen this take off, the MSL role and medical affairs. Can you talk about the evolution and how it went from those days to how it's kind of evolved into this present day?
Yeah, Tom, I think really the need is there, and the needs here today even for that deep scientific knowledge and understanding. So as you know today, there's so much science out there. There is no way possible that anyone, even a thought leader who spends their entire life in one area, can possibly keep up with data. And so here's where a medical department can actually be able to have those deep scientific discussions and come up with other ways in how to solve these issues. I think the ability to have these long scientific discussions. I mean, I remember the day when we could sit down for 30, 40, 50 minutes and really kind of digest the data and kind of help people along. We'll talk about it later. That's actually changed quite a bit, as you
Yeah.
might imagine. But there really was a need for that. And then also we look at different factors from studies. We look at the fact of looking beyond the value and things like that. So I do think that there really are things that really have evolved. And then medical has a presence, medical has a voice, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say that in medical affairs we definitely are patient focused. There's a lot of
Mm.
people that talk about different things, but keeping up that patient focus is essential for us to be successful.
Love it. Love it. And what about as you look through the past, were there any milestones or turning points over the course of time?
Yeah, there was. I mean, I remember the days when I first started. Um, no one really kind of knew what medical affairs was. There was always a commercial organization, a marketing organization, and there was always that research. But they're like, who are you guys? What do you do? And so we had to do a lot of education about the potential of what medical affairs could do. Now I believe we're an equal partner. So when we start to launch products now, when we start to do early things, you always have R&D, medical affairs, and commercial in, and they work together because we all have different points of view. And so that's really what I see the evolution. It's the seat at the table that we all have today now. But I will tell you, there were some milestones, and I'll go back again when I first started in the 90s. The representatives, there was something called the Waxman Act, and representatives at that point could take a paper that was off label. There was a scientific data that was outside the label. They would be able to come to the doctor. They would give in a nice plastic folder. They would hand this to the doctor and say, "Here's some interesting information. I can't talk about it, but I will have this MSL person, this field medical person, come back and talk to you about it if you're interested." And
Huh,
so those were the very, very early days
I love it.
of that. And then what happened is, there just was there was a thing called MedWatch that the FDA had implemented in the 90s, where there was a very high focus on not promoting off-label. So remember, when I talked about this, this was unsolicited. You'd have to ask a question and do that, and that's the way things are today. But companies kind of took some liberties and started to promote off-label, and then the government said no, this is not right. And there were many suits that were brought against companies, and actually $1 billion suits through through the government and the OIG department and pharma. And so what happened was there was a retraction. So we retracted, and no one could talk about things off label. There were compliance departments that were built up. And for a while, the MSL and field medical affairs functions were under big scrutiny, making
Mm,
sure that we were doing all the right things. Now, that's right, Tom. It's absolutely right. Sometimes you get some momentum and you need to be, reined in and brought back. But what I've seen recently is again an evolution of the government saying, you know what, there are a lot of products that are out there that they don't have a labeled indication, but there needs to be discussions about this, and we need to help patients again. And so there's just something recently the FDA has granted guidance. It's called SIUU, and that's Scientific Information on Unlabeled Uses. And the government, the FDA, has now said that you can, in certain instances, if you have something that's been in a peer-reviewed journal, you can discuss it. The medical department can discuss it proactively with the physician. And so
mm.
you see how this has kind of come full
Yeah,
circle. So,
yeah,
this waxes and wanes, but it's at the end of the day, what we want is we want to have the scientific information given to the provider so that they can help the patient at the right time. And so I think all of this is kind of coming to fruition, and it kind of waxes and wanes over these years.
yeah, yeah. I keep hearing you talk about science, deep science. And so when we look at the rise of science and technology and advancement, um, how has that elevated or played a part in medical affairs over the years?
Yeah, it's really remarkable when I think back about all the things that have transpired over these 30 years. The science is so complex, Tom.
Mm,
It's not easily describable. I remember I launched Lipitor, and all you had to do was say, "Hey, it lowered LDL, the bad
yeah,
cholesterol, and it
yeah.
raised good cholesterol," and that was about it. I've been in the oncology world for about the last 13 to 15 years. The evolution of biomarkers, the evolution of targeted therapy. It is so complex, and especially for the routine community doc, for the routine provider, the general oncologist, it is so difficult for them to keep up. They need a medical person to augment the commercial person to be able to really talk and make sure that the agents are used appropriately for the right patient at the right time. And so, we have a lot of guidance documents, we have a lot of guidelines that are out there, but medical really needs to be able to simplify these complex areas and complex terms so that prescribers can really get the information they need. So it really has evolved.
And I think what you just said, there should be a collective sigh of relief after hearing you say that, because I think there's a lot of people, and I know because I talk to them, that are worried about artificial intelligence and machine learning. And is there going to come a time where a machine can do the job of an MSL, where a KOL just has to go in front of a kiosk and just ask it questions and then get the answers? And then, oh, I don't need the MSL. What you just said proves that the complexity of science in this day and age makes it so vital to have a human in that seat. Or am I over exaggerating that?
Oh, you're not over exaggerating at all, Tom. I get the same question too. I've gotten this question for the last couple of years. The one thing we have to remember is, first of all, we're all human.
Mm,
We need a human interaction. We need to have, like we're having right here and right now, we need to have a dialogue back and forth. And while AI will get very good at facts, it will be able to certainly augment and help. I look at AI being able to spread information, help information. Most companies, the a ratio of a representative to an MSL is sometimes around 10 to 1, 10 reps to one MSL. In oncology, it's a little smaller, maybe 4 reps to one MSL. There's never going to be enough MSLs to cover every doc out there. It's just, and let's not even talk about just physicians, but PAs, nurse practitioners,
right.
those extenders, those important people who diagnose and treat, they need to have that information. So we're never going to get to a point. AI will help. It's
Hmm.
going to help us, but it will never take the place of a human because the human can think and we can also alter our plan. When we talked about what we're going to talk about today, we're going to go off on a lot of tangents, right? AI cannot do that, but humans can. We have the thinking process, we have the knowledge, and I'll argue most of us, at least in the MSL world, have clinical experience. And so I can still rely on that clinical experience I had for 14 years, how many years ago? And you need that human element, Tom. It'll never go away. At
Yeah,
least,
I think I honestly think that that's such an important piece of information to share with the medical affairs community right now, because I think a lot of people are concerned about that. But as you said, it's not just, I don't think it's just a complexity of the science. I think it's the way the healthcare industry has evolved as well. Like you said, there's nurse practitioners and PAs, and there's just so much that's involved in it now, and they need the help of field medical. So I love it. Let me ask you this: as we look at we talk about relationships with internal stakeholders. How has that evolved over the course of time when we look at the relationship between medical affairs and R&D, marketing, obviously, commercial counterparts? How much has that changed?
well, that's changed dramatically, actually, over the years. And I alluded to it a little earlier, but let's dive in a little bit deeper. I think at one point people just wondered, well, what do you guys do in medical affairs? But now there's not a company out there, even very small startups. One of the first departments that will be started will be medical affairs.
Hmm.
And so even early in the development of compounds, you need a medical person there to guide, to look at the landscape, the environment, what are the competitors that are out there. Because remember, it's not just about your product, it's about the competitors. And I can remember doing some clinical trials take 3 to 4 years to complete. Well, a lot happens in that 3 to 4 years. New products come on the market, new tests come out,
Hmm.
diagnostic tests,
Hmm.
biomarkers. The science is constantly evolving, and so what I see now, and I'm thrilled to see it, is everybody are equal partners, and we all have our areas of expertise. And going back to where we started here about medical affairs having their feet both in the research end of it as well as the commercial end of it, and ensuring that everyone uses the product safely and effectively. That's really dramatically changed, and I'm glad to see it because I think all of us working together, when you have three minds working on one project, it's always better than one. And so I think
Hmm.
everybody has their areas of focus and strengths, and the key element is everybody has to respect each other's opinions, Tom, and that's what I've seen over the last few years. I've had great partners where I've been in the last few companies, and that's really where it's invaluable.
Yep. Yep. What about on the patient side? Would you say the increased need for patient centricity, how has that influenced medical affairs and MSLs?
It's really changed a lot. So first of all, we get patients involved when we're designing studies because we always think about science, get the
Right.
science, here's this. But patients will say, well, you know what? I can't take this product. What about if we have some side effects and I can't, are there different ways to deliver the compound? You think about this, we've got incredible technology where we have auto injectors that auto inject the medicine itself. We have different ways to deploy, and we need a patient. And so we start with patients. We work a lot with patient advocacy groups
Hmm.
and patient advocates that help us design trials. So that's on the early end. On the later end, they also help us to kind of look at how what we call real world evidence. And
Hmm.
so the patients give us ideas about how this can be used in the real world. Because anytime we do a clinical trial, it's an artificial environment.
Right.
They're in a clinical trial and they're getting placebo or they're getting active control. That's not really real life. But we start to look at this and we start to look at that ability to have real world evidence and do that. And then certainly there's affordability of medicines and how we do that. So at the end of the day, Tom, we still need to have the patient. We say this a lot, but it's truly meaningful. The patient is our North Star. We never should do anything without the patient in mind whenever we do anything, whether it's develop trials or get a product out to market. So
Yeah.
patient centricity it's always been there, but it's even more important now because of the complexity of the medicines that we have.
Yeah. And I'm curious, I'm thinking back to the, KOLs and HCPs and how different is KOL interaction now versus back in the day?
Yeah, it's a great question, and so this is the only time I'll say the pandemic had a positive influence. This is the only thing I could think that's good about the pandemic, and that is our thought leaders, our HCLs, our practitioners learned how to use Zoom.
Yeah,
Okay, so they never
right,
used to do that before. I had no idea. Just come into the office. I don't know how to work this stuff.
right.
And so they learned that, and by doing that we could extend our reach. Okay, so we could
Hmm.
extend our reach and we could reach out where it used to, we'd have MSLs drive 3 hours to a small little town, have a half an hour meeting and drive 3 hours back. Now we just pull up a Zoom call and we can get a lot more done, still
Sure.
having that dialogue. However, our attention spans have shrunk, Tom. So
Yeah.
the old days of me coming with my computer and setting up the projector and going through 30 to 40 slides, that's over, Tom. So if
Yeah.
people are still doing that, that's going to be very
Mm.
difficult to hold people's attention spans. And so now we have to develop techniques. We need to do a lot of training on this, but how do you tell that complex story, that complex scientific story in 5 minutes? And
Yeah.
how can we make it stick? And there's a lot of bioscience around this, Tom, and there's so I see this as the future. So we have to be very, and everybody has their phone with them, right? And you know what attention spans are on phone. You know, if you don't get that information in 3 to 4 minutes, forget it. I'm gone. And so that's really has evolved the way we discuss science and how we can still have impact. So that's, I think, changed dramatically. But you know, there's still that opportunity for that live interaction.
Yeah. You mentioned the future. What do you see happening in the future? Now that we've talked about the history and the evolution, like what's next for
So
medical?
I'll start with saying what's going to stay the same, okay, and
Okay.
then get what's next. But what's going to stay the same is you still need that patient focus. If we ever lose the fact that we are not representing a product, we're representing a patient and how they can get better on our medicines. I still think live interactions will be there, Tom, forever.
Yeah.
It's just going to be very much changed. The other thing that won't change is trust. We talk a lot about what we do, but if we don't develop trust with the people that we interact with and engage with, we'll lose that ability to really engage. But what I really think will change is some of the things we talked about. AI. I think AI is going to help us a lot, Tom. It's
Yeah.
going to help us to just navigate through all the morass of all the science. So I think AI is going to be there. I think us changing our focus to short bites of information and getting information to people, and then also figuring out ways because you know, we need to figure out a way when it's 3 o'clock in the morning and somebody needs an answer. How can we still get a interaction that's going to be meaningful to someone because they got a patient in front of them? So those things will change, they'll evolve. But you know, I always believe in that trust and that relationship. And I think we'll always need MSLs. We just will need to evolve the way we do our job, Tom.
Yeah.
And if we have, it's sort of Darwinian if you think about it. You know, it's the only way that you're going to survive is you're going to survive or die. And I do think we can use these tools, these trainings, all of this to continue with what we do.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I've been in the industry for a long time, not as long as you, but I've been in for a pretty long time. And going back in the 25 years I've been doing this, I go to a lot of conferences, and I feel like we're still talking about the same stuff. So what we were talking about, the value of field medical and the and metrics, and just I just feel like a lot of the topics have continued to stay relevant over the course of many, many years. And now there's new things. There's omnichannel, there's AI. So there's a lot of new things. So where do you see, like, what are we going to be talking about? I mean, you just mentioned a couple of things, but like, do you think we're still going to be talking about the same stuff in 5 or 10 years, or do you think that there's going to be drastic changes?
I I think for the most part, we're going to talk a lot about the same things. Let's talk about metrics, which is one of my it's a topic you know, I've talked about for 30 years. But if you peel that back, why are people asking you for metrics? Well, I want to make sure you're showing value to the company. I mean,
Right.
they're paying people a lot of money to get out there, engage with people.
Yep.
So yes, there's always going to be a way to look at metrics. Now, can we get better at measuring that? Can we look at impact? Yeah, we can. And you know, there's tools out there now, Tom, that I think a lot of companies are looking at. And in how, you know, we talk a lot about things like sentiment. How do people change their mindset, their thoughts about new entities, new products, new indications, the ability to diagnose quicker.
Yeah.
Those will change, but we've got to get better ways to measure that. And so those are ways we've never, we tend to, I always say in metrics, we tend to track what we can track, and you
Yeah.
can track an interaction, and yeah, but it's a pseudo measurement. I do think we'll come up with some abilities through innovations in technology to show the impact that we're having. So for instance, if we could diagnose people earlier, if we can treat them earlier, if we can even prevent disease from ever occurring, I think those are the things we need to really concentrate. And that technology will evolve, Tom, and that's going to help us to show those types of measurements and the impact that we have. We know we have impact. It's just hard to show it sometimes, and I
Yeah.
think we're going to evolve in that area.
Ralph, you're the best. Appreciate
Thanks,
it,
Tom.
brother. I was so excited to have you on, and of course you crushed it. You did not disappoint. So thank you so much. How's retirement treating you?
Retirement's treating me very well, Tom. There's a little story here. I'm sitting in a study room in Pima County. I'm sitting in Arizona warming up for a couple of months in my RV, but I still get this great opportunity to talk to you and engage. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. So retirement's great. I was a little worried that I wasn't going to have anything to do, but hey, Tom, it's all great.
When you're as good as Ralph Rewers, you'll always have stuff to do because everybody's going to want to have a piece of you. I know I'm one of those. So you just made my day, and I'm just grateful that I've had the opportunity today to share you with my audience. So thank you again. And everybody that's listening right now, thank you for your support. Please share this with others because I think it's such great information if you're interested in medical affairs. So as always, we'll see you next time. Thanks, Ralph.
Take care. Take care, Tom. Thanks a lot.